We're holding the Shema first paragraph. Yesterday we spoke about the concept of Hayom. As Chazal tell us, as the Midrash tells us, you beinecho kechadoshim, that when you experience Torah, it should be as if it was recently received. Not something of the past, but something of the present. So what the Torah is revealing, for the Torah to impact on you, the study of Torah, when you engage, if it's something which does not touch you, that it's something special, it will have, although you fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah, but in terms of its effect, it will not have that effect that it's meant to have. It's only if you sense it as something which is special, it's new, then it touches you. That's Hayom. A person has a child who he loves. Although he sees this child day in and day out, every day he sees that child, he never gets tired of seeing that child because of that innate love that he has for that child, because what that child represents, being his offspring, an extension of himself. So there's something I just thought about this moment. Every Shabbos and Yom Tov, on the festivals and the holidays, we make a supplication. Give us our portion in your Torah. What do you mean our portion? So the Chofetz Chaim explains that at Sinai, besides the people who were there in body and soul, every future Jew who's meant to be born, his soul was at Sinai. And at Sinai, each soul was given its portion of Torah. Meaning the portion one person has may not be the portion of the others. It's your portion. And you have to be worthy to be able to recall, to actualize that portion that was given to you at Sinai, which is embedded in your soul. And as I always say, that original portion, one learns it and studies it from a very exclusive special teacher. Because the Talmud tells us that in utero, when the Jewish child is in his mother's womb, there's an angel that teaches the child the Torah in entirety. And the level of clarity in which that child's able to absorb that Torah is at a prophetic level, because the child in utero, although it's a physical being, it's the unborn fetus, it has a spiritual innate value, because the Talmud tells us, the Gemara tells us, the child in utero sees from one end of the world to the other. There's no obstacle, there's no blockage. It's a level of absolute clarity. So when the angel communicates the Torah to that child, he teaches the child its entire portion of Torah. When we're born, right before we're born, the angel touches the child on the mouth, and the child forgets everything it was taught. However, the objective of life, the amount of Torah one has to study is recall, is to recoup all that Torah that was embedded in one's soul. That's what it is. So the Torah that's taught to us, it's taught to us as it was taught to us at Sinai. The angel teaches us that original Torah. So when you relearning that Torah, it should be like Hayom. We were at Sinai. We received that portion at Sinai. That portion at Sinai that was given to us is taught to us by an angel right before we're born. Life objective is, our potential is to recoup that Torah that was taught us in utero. To be able to recoup that Torah, to what degree do you have to be committed? That you see that Torah as something special, as if you heard it today, which is most recently heard in utero, which actually was communicated by the angel. And if you have that sense of value, that that's what you're studying, then you're going to recall it. Then it will have that value, it will have that impact on you, which is the ultimate concept of the antidote to the evil inclination. Was the moment we're able to incapacitate the evil inclination, we have clarity. The only reason why we don't have clarity is because we see alternative. There's no alternative to the correct decision. But when you study Torah and you have that special level of clarity, there's no alternative. In that context, there's no alternative. Then you see it hayom, but you have to be able to achieve that level of being special, and as a result of that, it will impact and affect you at that level. So the Torah is revealing to us that these words which I am teaching today at Sinai, it's still hayom. You have to experience it as hayom, as today, because it's almost literally hayom. Not only because God gives it a divine intervention to allow you to appreciate it as it was given at Sinai, but he even provided you your initial teacher, the angel, to teach it to you, whatever your portion is before you were born into existence. The Gemara tells us that when you study Torah, you have to meet a number of prerequisites to be able to come upon the Torah. What is it? Firstly, you have to have humility. You have to be humble. Because the Talmud tells us, the Gemara tells us that Torah is compared to water. Many verses in prophets, it's compared to water. And what is the characteristic of water? It flows from an elevated location to a low location. Identically, Torah cannot be processed or acquired only b'misha dato shvelo. Only a person who has a humble spirit. You have a humble mindset. If you're humble, then you are the receptacle to process it and to be the repository for the Torah itself. That's one prerequisite. Also, if you have humility and you have negation of ego, what is your objective when you study that Torah? You're looking for one thing. What is God saying? It's not what I'm saying. I'm not using it as a platform to espouse my own ideas. And it's not my poetic license to show you how brilliant I am. But rather, if you have humility, I have one objective. What is God saying? That's my only interest. There's nothing intermingled into that application, only selfless dedication to understand, come upon God's truth. That's what it is. These are the prerequisites. So the number of prerequisites. What you recoup was taught to you. It's your portion. What, to be able to be qualified to recoup it, you have to have humility, which has multiple levels of value, as I just explained. But there's another thing that the Gemara tells us. You have to toil for it. You must toil for the Torah, and only if you meet that criteria of toiling will God allow you to come upon its truth. If you've toiled and you tell me you came upon its truth, you can believe that person that he did come upon its truth. If a person says, I did not toil and I came upon its truth, you should not believe that person. although he may believe he came upon the truth, but that's not the truth. Because without meeting the prerequisite of toil, God will not allow you to come upon its truth. And if a person says, I've toiled, and I'm still was not able to come on its truth, the person did not toil sufficiently. He may have believed he toiled sufficiently, and that's why he did not come upon its truth. So all these prerequisites, whether it's humility at various levels, whether it's the effort that you make, the sacrifice that you make for the acquisition of that truth, these are all prerequisites. Weaning yourself from material, from the physical. Possible tocha. As Moshe Rabbeinu says, when he received the Torah in heaven, he did not eat for 40 days and 40 nights. What's he communicating? He did not eat bread, did not drink water. He says, why did I have such a capacity to be able, although God's the teacher, you couldn't have a better teacher than God himself. But why did I have the capacity to be able to understand it and internalize it? Because I did not eat for 40 days and 40 nights. That since I was weaned from the material, from the physicality, that's why I have that capacity and ability to come upon its truth and to internalize that truth. So Moshe says, I'm teaching you, people, from my own experience, as I only came upon it, because I was willing to compromise my physicality. If you compromise your physicality, you'll be able to come upon its truth also. But even in terms of the way you're touched by it, to what degree you touched? You touched upon it based on your capacity, to what degree you're able to internalize it. So if you meet all these prerequisites, humility at various levels, you toil for it, and you wean yourself from material, that you are less of a materialistic person, then you have all your spiritual nerve endings are ready to be touched. And when they're touched, you sense its special value. Then it's chadoshos. It's something as if it's the first time you've heard it. Every time you hear it, it's like the first time. Because that's the way, the degree that you see how special that is. David HaMelech says, King David says in Psalms, Tov li Torahs picha me'alfi zov v'chesef. The words of Torah are good to me as if the values thousands of talents of gold and silver. That's what David says. If a person has gold and silver, is given more. Whatever you have, you still value the more that you're given because it's gold and silver. These are precious metals. He says, totally Torah's picha. Whenever I hear words of Torah, it's like you're giving me thousands of talents of gold and silver. So what does that mean? As much Torah as David has and acquired and was able to understand, he was never sated. Because since he appreciated and understood the infinite preciousness of Torah, every additional word was, again, greater degrees of preciousness being given to him. But if you have that, then it's hayom. It never becomes old hat. You're never pushing that boulder up the mountain. But rather you're being drawn. There's like a magnetic force that's drawing you there. That's what it is. I saw something very interesting last week's Parsha. It's phenomenal. It's an insight which I never had before, and it's something which I've read the Rashi before. We read in last week's Parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people that the Torah and the mitzvos, the chukim, the statutes and the laws of the Torah, he chochmaschem ubinaschem le'nei hagoyim. It is your wisdom and your insightful understanding in the eyes of the nations of the world. Could you imagine? Person observes dietary laws, the red heifer, not wearing linen and wool in one garment. These are all statutes. Besides the other laws, which are rational laws. If you live by the Torah and observe it, you will be seen as wise and insightful. And they will say, there's no nation like the Jewish people. Because they're seen as chochmaskim bineskim leini agoyim. And they say, we are an am navon the chocham. We are an insightful, wise people. If we live by the Torah itself and observe its statutes and its laws. Then the Torah says, Im lo sishmru, what happens if you don't observe it? So Rashi cites the Midrash. The word sishmru, if you don't retain it, if you don't review it, first, of course, you have to study, but even if you study, to be able to be in touch, to do it right, not to corrupt it, and to observe it meticulously. Im lo ta'afsu, if you don't study it, you're going to corrupt it. And if you corrupt it, you're going to be seen as fools in the eyes of the nations of the world. You observe it meticulously and correctly, they're going to be amazed by your wisdom and by your insight. But if you don't study them, and therefore by not studying, you don't have clarity and you don't fulfill it correctly and you corrupt them, they will see you as fools. So let's understand. What is ego? What does it do for us? It drives us to become achievers. Because ego says we starve for acknowledgement. We want to be acknowledged. Acknowledged as what? In something of value. That we're unique, we're special. Whether it's brilliance, whether it's wealth, whether it's insightful, every person has, that's natural to every human being. To be acknowledged. And people looking for acknowledgement. People look for acknowledgement for different reasons. A person studies the Torah for the sake of the Torah. Not for acknowledgement whatsoever. Purely for the sake of the Torah. And he amasses tremendous knowledge and he reviews it and retains it. As a result of that, he's able to actualize it and fulfill its obligation meticulously, correctly. What happens when the nation see this special person, the special Jew? They're taken aback. Is there such a nation that's chacham v'navon, that's so wise and so insightful? They're amazed. What happens if you do it half-baked? You don't fulfill the mitzvah right. You corrupt it. It has a semblance of what it's meant to be. How does the nations of the world see you? As fools. They see you as fools. Archaic, primitive. You're a primitive people. Why, when you do it correctly, why are you seen as the wise, insightful people? But if not, you're seen as fools. No, there's such a thing known as an aura. An aura. An aura is something which is not tangible. It's just the presence of the person. If he's special, there's an aura. What determines that aura? There's something innate in the person which actually causes this aura to radiate from that person. Torah tells us, if you go and you address your spirituality and fulfill my commandments as prescribed meticulously, you will be seen by the nations of the world. They will see you in the most positive light. It's your wisdom and your insightful in the eyes of the people, and they will say, Mi goy godel v'chochem v'novo. Is there a nation as great and as insightful, as wise as Jewish people? The why? Because since you're following the prescription as God prescribed it, now you have the aura. If you have that aura, they're amazed. They stand in amazement in terms of what the Jews are. What happens if you don't behave that, if you don't fulfill them meticulously, because you don't review it, and as a result of lack of knowledge, you do it half-baked, and you corrupt it. You know how you're seen? You're seen as fools in the eyes of the nations. As I said, you're a primitive people. You're backward. You're not in touch. We want nothing to do with you people. You're an impediment to our society to advance itself. So let's understand. A Jew who's committed, what we call the real Torah Jew, he himself understands his value. The value is, there's no problem with self-esteem. I am who I am because of who I am. The other person, he studies, but he doesn't study correctly, doesn't review, but he wants to be observant. But when he observes, he doesn't observe correctly. Because since he's not in touch, because he doesn't review, he forgets, or he never understood because he didn't apply himself sufficiently. So how is he perceived by others? Like fools. Who wants to be seen as a fool? You don't want to see me as a fool. So what do? You do some patchwork. You have to compensate for it. Your Judaism takes the back burner. Or maybe you don't even put it on the back burner. You know, I visit the synagogue, my father's yard site, because I keep his anniversary. Because all that I have is due to my education, the bank account, the properties. I keep it. I observe his anniversary of his death. And my mother, because she loved me. That's why I keep it. You got it? Rosh Hashanah, because that's when I say Yisker. You know, and Yom Kippur, I say Yisker. That's why I go. Why? Because it's not the Judaism. The Judaism only creates that aura if you do things right. But who's going to invest time in something which you look like a fool? And you're seen as a fool. If that's the case, what do? You run the other way. You flee from it. So the Jew is truly the self-hating Jew. He believes that anti-Semitism is because we're different than they are. The difference is causes the anti-Semitism. But why do they see us different and not pride themselves that we're part of their society? And they're privileged to see Jews. You know why? Because you're not living properly as a Jew. If you live properly as a Jew, there'd be an aura, and they would pride themselves that you are the prime citizens of the country. Of course, they see you as wise and insightful. But if not, what happens? As time goes on, you inch your way out and eventually start running from it. And you blame all problems that exist within society. Jewish problem is because religion is the culprit. You hear this? They blame religion as the culprit. Rather, religion is the ace in the hole, so to say. Because it's chochmaschem binaschem le'enei hagoyim. It's your insight and your wisdom in the eyes of the nation. If it's Torah. Torah is meticulous observance, but it's corrupted. And it's not as God prescribes what it's supposed to be. What does it project? It projects foolishness, primitiveness, archaic. You just walk out of the cave. I'm a modern man. I'm not a cave person. I'm not something of the past. We live in the present. It's progressive Judaism. Progressive. Progress. So the cause of all slippage, and we keep backpedaling, is because we're not involved sufficiently, because you can't appreciate what you have unless you have a knowledge base. You have a pittance of knowledge. You know, before he has to speak, he downloads, he Googles all the things on that subject, and you think he's Moses off the mountain. But if not for that computer, he would know nothing. So, you know what it means to be a Jew? Could you appreciate what it means to be a Jew? Well, do you realize the accolades I got for that speech? It took me half an hour. Thank God I have that very special computer. You can download any, what's his name? Or they have this website, any work, any subject, download immediately. It's ready-made. It's like you used to have the meat pies. You just put them in the TV dinners, put them in the oven for 15 minutes, microwave, and you're ready to go. If that's what Judaism is, you understand. You're not going to project something special. Not impressed. It's very interesting. This is fact. There are two types of speakers, Torah disseminators. There's one person who's a true Talmud Chacham. When he speaks, people march. When this other guy speaks with his high-falutin English, with the Oxford accent, and with whatever else he infuses it, it's pretty interesting. Nobody's touched by it. Why? By one person, he is touched, and it can be the same information, because it's emanating from a different kind of person. One person has that aura. The other person doesn't have that aura. Therefore, they're not touched. The person who has that aura, it's a different projection. He touches the people. Because that person is experiencing Torah Hayom. He's able to recoup what the angel taught him. As a spiritual being, pre-birth, you're spiritual. You see from one end of the world to the other. And this person prays, let me merit to receive my portion that I was given at Sinai that the angel taught me, to be able to recoup it, to be considered recall. Who's worried about that? I got to you go for, you're in law or medicine, you have to keep getting these credits to be updated. You ever hear anybody updating his Torah knowledge? Unless you really value it and that's primary in your life, doesn't happen. So this person, it's second fiddle, as they used to call it. The man's not musically inclined, but it's second fiddle. You got it. He doesn't even know what the fiddle is. He thinks it's, Heifetz, played the fiddle.